Good morning. Can we invite the administration and the deputations to join us, please? Good morning, members. Welcome to the hearing. Now, I will invite you to speak by the order of the seating plan, and you will each have 3 minutes. I must remind you that your submission given at this hearing is not protected by the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance, Cap 382. So there is no protection and immunity. And your written submission is also not protected by this ordinance. I may also remind you to refer to the note for members of the public attending meetings in conference rooms or observing meetings in public galleries in the Legislative Council complex. The note is attached to your invitation letter. It is also tabled here. So please, if you wish, those in the public gallery, you could ask for a copy from the security staff of the council. And if you have any written submissions, please pass them to our staff. Now, I would like the hearing to be conducted in an orderly manner. If there's any breach of the rules, then I will give you a warning. If you don't heed the warning, then I will invite you to leave the room. And if there are any undesirable circumstances, then I may have to suspend the meeting. So without further ado, yes, Mr. Chen. You know, at the public hearing, there could be motions from time to time. Then how do you deal with that? Well, for our hearing, we have a packed schedule. We, sitting here from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., but we have a really tight schedule. So if there are any motions that members wish to move, I hope we could deal with them at the next meeting. Thank you. First, Mr. Cheung Ning. Good morning. Hong Kong enjoys freedom, democracy, and rule of law. Now, during the weekends, there were peaceful protests making various demands in the past, but then they all went without incidents. But now things have changed, and so we want to go back to what we had before. That's why I support the regulation to prohibit face covering, because in recent protests we see mass protesters, they would act in a radical manner. We saw that MTR stations were trashed, traffic lights were damaged, and so on. These are all facilities for the use of the public, and when these facilities are damaged, they cause inconvenience to the public. Especially on one occasion, I was delayed going to work. I only ended up getting to work in the afternoon, and also many businesses have been affected, tourism sector and so on. And then by the end of the year, probably see much increase in unemployment rate. Now, Hong Kong people would like to various issues to be addressed. For example, the housing issue, upward mobility for young people, the wealth gap, and so on. All these issues, we need to all work together to deal with them. There is not a single solution to address all the issues in one go. So we need to set priorities. And but for now, the top priority is, as the government suggested, we need to stop the violence and the chaos. And so everyone needs to work on that too. And we could also learn from the experience of other countries. Now, the prohibition on face covering regulation is useful. This kind of legislation has a long history. From the Wall Street Journal, we learned that in the 2011 Occupy Wall Street movement, the police in New York also invoked this legislation with over 100 years of history, and they arrested a large number of people. Now, any legislation is to really stop people from causing too much damage. In Hong Kong, we have an independent judiciary. So in the enforcement of the prohibition on the face covering regulation, the courts will play an important role. So we should have confidence in our judicial system. This regulation will not affect normal and peaceful protests and assemblies, but rather it will actually give more protection to those taking part, so that the event won't be hijacked by a small number of radicals. I hope everyone will support the regulation. Thank you. Next, please. Mr. Kwok Wing Kin. I speak in opposition to the regulation. As you know, it's not just that protesters are masked. The evil cops are also masked. They give various reasons. They say they don't want to be doxxed, or the radicals may harass their family members. But isn't it the same for protesters? The blue ribbons dox the protesters, and also there are some protesters with chronic illnesses. There may be various reasons why they have to wear a mask. And also because there is a tear gas, we see that many evil cops sometimes were caught too by the tear gas, and then they fell to the floor after breathing in tear gas. So is it true that then for protesters we're immune to tear gas, or we just won't breathe in tear gas? So I don't know why the police could wear masks but protesters could not. And then we see that for this regulation there is no exemption for the police. Now, the defense under the regulation is that if it's related to work, and then it's a defense, and the Security Bureau said that the reporters are covered too. But then the evil cops won't study the regulation. They would actually tear away the mask of reporters. Now, if they give a defense at court, how come the evil cops don't arrest each other? Because they're also wearing masks. They're also not exempted. It's just about, this regulation just offers a defense. So why don't they arrest each other first, and then they could give the defense in court? So there is obviously double standard. And so they can do one thing and preach another. This whole regulation is ridiculous. It's they invoked an outdated emergency emergency law to enact this regulation to undermine our freedoms. But that will only fan further police brutality. You know, Chao Chi-lok was sacrificed exactly because of police brutality. So I'm going to use my 1 minute for us to pay silent tribute to Chao Chi-lok. We hope that his case will finally come to light, and the police must no longer lie. So did the police cause Chao Chi-lok to fall to the second floor? The police said that the riot police never entered the car park, but later on they admitted that they did go into the car park. The police said they never delayed the rescue, but then from many footages we saw that for a full 20 minutes, rescue operation was delayed. Now, they say that now they will do investigation, but who will be convinced? They are just investigating their own people. So when it comes to the cause of death for Chao Chi-lok and for police brutality, there is need for independent inquiry. Thank you. Next, Ms. Liu Lok. I'm strongly against the prohibition on face covering regulation. There are two reasons. One, when people protest or mask, there is need for them to wear a mask to protect their privacy. The regulation is meant to prevent some radicals from escaping the law or justice because they wear masks. But then for the big majority of protesters wearing a mask in marches, they are peaceful, rational, and non-violent. You might ask why these protesters have to wear a mask. Because they are afraid. They're afraid that people will try to settle score with them later. Now, there are media reports that airline staff or Chinese business staff have been exposed or reported upon, and then they've been fired. So the basic law gives us the right to protect our own privacy. That's why for these non-violent, radical, rational, and peaceful protesters, they choose to wear a mask to take part in a march. But if you stop them from wearing a mask, then you are taking away their basic right to express their will freely. Now, the regulation, and then the police are allowed to wear a mask when enforcing the law, so it's a matter of justice. How come the people can't wear a mask, but the police can? In recent media reports, we can see that the police have been using excessive force in carrying out their duties, and they do not show their warrant card, and then they barge into private places. These are examples of police's abuse of power. Now, very often police would hide their warrant card or their police ID number, so we are not able to take to task those police officers who abuse their power. And then protests are not free from the fear of police's abuse of power. And because the police are able to hide their identity, so they will actually probably help further abuse of power. It will only lead to more conflicts and social unrest. That's why I believe this regulation cannot really address the social problems we see. Rather, the basic rights of the public to assembly and demonstration would be undermined, and also it could further help the police in their abuse of powers. And this is my personal views. I hope this subcommittee will listen to the voices of the public. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm for life. I am against suicide. This is the 5th month of the protest. Well, according to this character in this anime, but people make the same mistakes over and over. We got rid of this extradition bill to China, but then we got this mask ban. So we can see the chief executive is making a mistake. It's irreversible. One executive council once said that with this mask ban, this is the lesser evil, because when we look at the other countries, especially the democracies, they all have this kind of mask ban in place. US, Australia, and other democracies. But there's a fundamental difference here. The people there can vote people in the office, and they have a voice, and they can vote in a different president or leader, and that's how they get the messages across. That's what you see in democracy, but you don't have that here in Hong Kong. In the past, Hong Kong people cringe at this kind of conflict clash, but then things are different now. They stand with those protesters, with people, with millions taking to the streets, 2 millions, but then the government refused to listen to what people had to say. And there are so many occasions to mark 21st of July or the 1st of October, and even yesterday, all the protesters were saying that's because the government has shown us that peaceful protesters wouldn't work. Even with what looks like a curfew, the problem has never been solved. All this talk about ending the violence, ending the chaos. Now, back in the 1980s, there was police abuse in South Korea. The police tried to cover the whole thing up. There was, in June in a certain year, there was a huge democracy movement. There was a whole movie out of it. There was a line there saying that the only weapon left was truth. Truth alone was the only thing that could topple a regime. The government has been saying that it will listen to what people have to say, but then we see a huge chasm between the government and the people on the other side. Once the people is losing touch of what people had to say, but now we don't see the government actually listening to people. As we enter in the 5th month, how do we bring the protest to an end? It's all on the government. I'm going to quote from the movie The Batman. Right before the dawn's darkest moment, but then dawn will come. And lastly, I want to say, Zhao Zilao, Alex Zhao, may you rest in peace. Thank you for... Next, we will have Miss Cherry Wong. Good morning, everyone. Up to this point, I have no idea whether the meeting today will mean anything. The government has already brought in this emergency regulation ordinance. There was this mask ban. We might well be doing something in vain. I still recall that there was this press conference about the mask ban. They were expecting the mask ban to curb the violence, but then you can tell from media reports that the protesters will still put on a mask, they take to the street. So what's all this? Have you accomplished anything towards this end of curbing? You have more than 300 people arrested. Let's talk about Southern Playground alone. There was more than 200 arrests there alone. Is that what you mean, calming things down? Have you accomplished the goal? And have you realized that this law doesn't really work? There's all this police abuse, arresting people wantonly. You need something. There has to be a way for people to hold those accountable, for especially the police. The police don't have an ID number on them. How do we make a complaint? We're getting hung up over this law. Why aren't we setting up an independent probe and find out the truth and vindicate everyone? Now, another point, when we were all against this mask ban because there is no protection for the press, frontline medical staff. There's no protection for their personal safety. They're always on the front line, helping people. They're following the news, and they're exposed to all the tear gas, all the beanbag rounds. The mask ban here prevents them from having the very basic protection they have. But then we even have medical staff who were arrested by the police for putting on a mask. The press workers have been asked over and over again to take off their mask. This chief superintendent from the police at the press conference even said that press workers, reporters were not exempt from the mask ban. How can we have different interpretations of the same piece of law? Who's right, who's wrong? If the frontline medical staff and reporters are subject to the law, why are the police exempt from it? This is too much. There's too much of a rush in pushing through this law. People aren't even aware of the details of the law. If you see, and they just enforce it carelessly. There's no certain standard. The law should be there to protect everyone instead of just helping the police abuse the law. I think there should be scrutiny. But then, here's a better idea. How about we ask the chief executive to withdraw this mask law? And finally, I'm against suicide. Thank you. Next. Mr. Tin Fong Chek. Good morning, everyone. Recently, in the education sector, we have been vilified of poisoning the mind of children. We see that schools have been trying to come up with ways to put up a fire, but the government is doing the opposite. On the day the mask ban was announced, there was this circular published by the schools. Students were agitated. Some students were in tears. They were wondering why was it that the government was doing that to the people of Hong Kong. Schools were doing everything to defuse the crisis, but the government has been fanning the flames and falsely accusing the education sector of causing the problem. This is unacceptable. Can the mask ban accomplish what it's supposed to do? We see it's not working. Up to this point, we don't see any sign that things are calming down. On the contrary, we see many other problems. Take the schools as an example. Students, teachers, they dare not put on their mask even when they're sick. Well, yes, there's somewhere it's written saying that schools are exempt from the mask ban, but then you have this white terror. It's spread to schools. It has an impact on our young people, and it also has an impact on public hygiene. It's something we should think through. If we have in place a law that doesn't really solve the problem and leads to other problems, why are we even having this law here? Just then someone mentioned, even when you have a lawful assembly, sometimes you do have to put on a mask. Employees are afraid of retaliation or other reprisals from their employers. There are also, say, for those the sexual minorities, they feel the need to protect themselves with a mask. There is such a need for them to put on a mask during the protest. Or let's come back to the main issue here. The reason that the violence has not stopped, it's not about whether people put on a mask or not. It's all about police brutality. We see officers can just barge in and charge into housing estates and arrest people, and they can even stop press workers or cancer patients from putting on a mask. We have this poll from Ming Pao. I think just over half of them gave 0 as the rating for the police officers. There was another poll, more than 60% of them disagree with the police brutality. I think we Chinese have this wisdom. We know that you can't just try to stop damn things in. You have to look into what has happened, police brutality, what people are thinking. Why we don't see people apologizing? Those responsible aren't apologizing. That's why we strongly oppose to the mask ban, and we also have to take seriously police brutality, and we need an independent probe. Thank you. Next, Mr. Tam Tak Chi. This gentleman, number one, the first one to go, that was saying, yes, I was talking about you. You talked about the U.S. They were a democratic nation. You weren't bringing that up. That's your kind of people. You have this kind of blind spot. People powers is strongly against the mask ban issued through the emergency regulatory law. Our legislators came out of the police station, Mr. Ray Chen. We are adamantly opposed to this kind of law. I'm also bringing Zhao Jilok and Chen Yinlam on this poster here, and it's also the student who got shot on the 1st of October, and also the girl whose left eye was shot by the police. Also, another protesters who died in Admiralty. Who killed them? It's the dirty cops. Who killed them? It's the people who supported the passing of this mask ban. All the lawmakers in favor of those who believe that you need draconian laws for troubled times. These people kill them all. You believe that more evil laws will be able to stop this chaos. It works the same way as the extradition bill. You aren't even aware of this. Even Mr. Wong Ting Kwong now sees this. It's not about how you stop the violence and the chaos. It's about, again, accountable government. The government has to take actions so that people wouldn't have the need to take to the streets again. They don't have to get beaten up by the police or sexually assaulted by the police. You need an accountable government, and the relevant questions are, what you should be doing. You should be doing something so that people don't have to flee to Taiwan or fall to their death in a car park. The government didn't address them. This government has been resorting to harsher laws. They have people beaten to death. They believe that this is the way to end the violence and the chaos. and then only leaving more people exposed to sexual violence, beaten to death. The tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party and their proxy, the Hong Kong government, have been resorting to this violence. They deprive people of their basic fundamental rights, human rights to put on a mask. They wouldn't allow people to express their views by peaceful means. We have people, you see, people are dying here. Let's take all those officials and lawmakers. None of them have died. The police officers can put on a mask, and they can even go as far as opening a bottle of champagne to celebrate the death of Chow Chi-lok. How dare you do that? Listen, even if you have this law passed, and I'm sure it will, but you will never be able to end the chaos and the violence. This kind of things, what I've just talked about, will happen again and again.
No, please note, this speaker, don't be so vulgar in your speech, okay? Don't be so vulgar in your speech. So, because I said you're wide awake now? What do you mean by vulgar? I said, you could drink your mother's champagne, so what's so vulgar about that? How is it vulgar? How come the police could say that, well, Chow Chi-lok's dead today, so I can crack open a bottle of champagne, and that's not vulgar? Now, please do not shout here. No, I'm saying the last sentence. I don't want to repeat what you said. You shut up. If you want to keep order, you keep order. Now, next, please. Miss Kwok Lam. Now, someone actually reported me. Now, I'm not well, but I dare not wear a mask today. I feel helpless. I was fired. Why did it happen? And yesterday, I didn't have the courage to. I wanted to go and visit the brothers of sisters of Chow Chi-lok, but I dare not because even though we're all Christians, I dare not wear a mask because I was afraid I would be arrested by the police. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chan Kwok Kee. Thank you. Sorry, I have flu. So for hygiene reason, I'm wearing a mask. I work in the insurance industry. I heard there are rumors that people will not be compensated because of the riot, but actually the insurance station already clarified that unless it's a civil unrest, so then there won't be compensation, but otherwise the insurance industry will adopt a liberal approach. So as long as they're covered for this vandalism and so on, then people will get compensated. And but then there's an upper limit of, say, for glass smashed. So many shops start wonder if they could continue with their business. Now, I admire young people for being so brave in this, and then the brothers, their brotherhood is so strong. Now, of course, if they express their views in a peaceful, non-violent and rational manner, that's fine. But then there are some who, the valiant, if others, are brought down by them, then actually they're the innocent ones, like the shops. So, there's already such social division. We have the yellow ribbons, the blue ribbons. There are all those the moderates, and then when we are walking the street, dare not speak because we're afraid we may offend friends or we could be beaten up. So there's much pressure. Now, the Bible says that we can do things, but we must not affect others. Now, young people say they want to bring everybody down, but if you haven't asked me, you shouldn't really try to bring me down with you. I had a good life, but why have things turned this way? I support the prohibition on face covering regulation. At least there is need for the time being. the protesters show their real face, and they will know that they have to shoulder the legal consequences for things they do. And also, psychologically, they will then exercise more self-restraint, and that will minimize the chance of radical behavior. So this is good for the society and for the protesters themselves. So what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. We must not bury our conscience. We must not, confuse right and wrong. And if anyone breaks the law, the person must face the consequence. It's the case for the protesters and for the police. I hope Hong Kong will soon resume peace, and then I could have a stable job. I can support my family. I will have money to pay the rent or to pay my mortgage. And then bosses don't have to worry how much more losses getting to suffer, and if they need to let some staff go. Next. Good morning. We're talking about the prohibition of face covering regulation. First, let me say that I support this regulation. It's not like some friends said just now, that the regulation will undermine their privacy, as Mr. Zhang just mentioned. No, I don't think you should be taking my picture, right? Well, I deliberately chose not to wear a mask today. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So the regulation works both ways. One, it could protect privacy, and then for people who use violence, they are wearing a mask to cover their identity, and so they keep escalating the level of violence. Do you think that face covering is there to protect their privacy, or does it help young people really? We see many violent protests over the past 5 months, and that's led to loss of life. Here, I would like to express my regret for the death of Mr. Chow Chi-lok of the UST. It doesn't matter what position we have, but we should mourn any loss of life. Now, Mr. Tam, you said just now you're going to dox me. I'm not going to prosecute you. The police will protect the public. I'm not going to argue with you either. Anyway. In the past 5 months, we've seen many violent protests, and there's loss of life, and police officer suffered a cut on his neck, and Mr. Junius Ho almost someone also used a knife at him. Anyway. Now, people are glorifying violence. They are rationalizing violence, and how would that be good for Hong Kong? If people want to express their views, they could do so through lawful and reasonable means. Now, by using violence, it will only plunge Hong Kong further into chaos, and there's no return for Hong Kong if that's the case. We all want Hong Kong to be good, but can we do it in a proper way? So for the bigger good of Hong Kong, the bigger good for us or for you. So now some ask how come the police could wear a mask, but police are carrying out their duties. Radicals could choose, or rioters could choose whether they want to attack the MTR stations or they want to occupy railways tracks. And then there's mention of paramedics and reporters, but are they really real paramedics and reporters? That's what we have to ask. Next, please, Mr. Wai Yao Yi.
Support the implementation of the anti-mask law. Since the implementation, we have seen a significant reduction in the number of the demonstrators. During the violent demonstration of the past 5 months, demonstrators have done many criminal activities in a mass manner. Due to the existence of the mask, it is difficult to pursue accountability according to law. Demonstrators also often lucky enough to escape legal sanction. This is one of the important reasons for the continuation of the unrest. For this situation, in many Western developed countries, including the United States, the usual practice is to ban the marking of the public gatherings and march in a legislative manner. At present, among the common law countries, some states in the United States and Canada have enacted laws prohibiting masking. Among the civil law countries, 7 countries including Austria, Denmark, France, Germany, Russia, Spain, and Sweden also have relevant legislation. So, I urge the Legislative Council to stand with the vast majority of Hong Kong people. By continuing to implement the anti-mask law, the Legislative Council can give the Hong Kong society a chance to bring the order back. Thank you.
好，多謝你。下一位。
下一位請食
Thank you. Next, please, Ms. Ching Moon Ying. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. In this past 5 months, we have seen all these confrontations. Now, protesters wore masks to take part in demonstrations and assemblies. There was violence used, and then they caused much destruction. So, allowing to wear masks is one of the reasons that this has been continuing. So, if we have this prohibition of face covering regulation, that will be good, because there are many protesters wearing masks or goggles or helmets to try to cover their identity. Now, with this regulation, wearing a mask is unlawful. But before this is done, it's not possible to take to task those who commit crimes wearing a mask. And then we see young primary students taking part in violent protests. And now they have these flash activities to damage public transport facilities and so on. And then we see doxing activities, doxing of people as well. Now Hong Kong is full of hatred now. This really is very sad for the people of Hong Kong. Now the government must tackle the problem at the source. The government has to distinguish between protesters and the rioters. Otherwise, we will never be able to stop the violence. That's why I believe the enactment of the prohibition on face covering regulation would be an effective means to stop criminal activities. It will help the police to enforce the law. So I hope we will all work together to bring Hong Kong back to what it was before, and then we could continue to make Hong Kong our safe and happy home. Thank you.
Ben 小姐。
Next, Ms. Chiu comment. Putting a mask shouldn't be an offense, and there's no point to have this law. I'm against this prohibition on face covering regulation. My first question is, why is it that the police officers can put on a mask when they're enforcing a law, but our citizens can't do the same thing when they're taking to the street? When you're saying members of the public are evading justice, evading legal liability, aren't the police doing the same? The mask ban is supposed to deter illegal activities, but then you're allowing the police to use excessive force in enforcing a law. You said the police don't have a choice when it comes to law enforcement, but they do have a choice over the level of force they're using. They don't have to use batons all the time to beating people. You don't have to pull out a gun to shoot people all the time. You can fire a warning shot. That's one of the options. You don't have to shoot people at close range, shoot people in the chest. This kind of police brutality is the result of the government conniving at this. Because of all these double standards, the prohibition on face covering regulation does not cover police. That gives the police officers the impression that they are there's no oversight on them. No one can hold them to account. You're saying, well, you have this white tag for us to identify the police. But when you have a clash, how many officers really have this white tag on them instead of doing everything they can to prevent other people from identifying them? Second thing, this prohibition on face covering regulation has an impact on people's way of life. People are living in white terror now. Just because you put on a face mask, if you're black clad, you are stopped by the police and asked questions. They look at you, and when you look at compartments in MTR, people there not put on that mask to protect. On all these officials, lawmakers, you don't seem to care about the people. You guys have your own cars. You don't take the public transit during rush hours. You don't know what life is like for ordinary people. Finally, please stop talking about this violence of the protesters. You really shouldn't be bypassing the Legislative Council to bring in this law. If the government has been able to connect with the people, we wouldn't have so many people taking to the streets on June 9th. So much wouldn't have happened, and then we even have on June 12th you have other protests and you have other protests going on. Had you made the right choice, had you done the right thing back then, so much wouldn't have happened. You should really have addressed the other demands. 5 demands, not one less. Putting on a mask shouldn't be an offense. The law makes no sense. Next, Mr. Law Kwok Ho. Thank you. First, I'm born here. I was brought up here. I'm 30 years old. I've been through SARS in the financial crisis of 1997. In the current unrest, this is the worst time. Think back in 2014, there was this umbrella movement. Back then, the umbrella was the sign, was the symbol of the protest. Now, the symbol has become someone on a helmet with masks. This is a movement of resistance. I'm in favor of this prohibition of face covering law because I don't want this unrest to go on. I see roads being blocked, MTR being vandalized, eateries being vandalized. The place I work have also been set fire to, has been burned. My question here, why do you think that your ideals can trump our safety? With this mask ban, there are all kinds of restrictions to it. There are many exemptions. Say if you're sick or if you are putting on a mask for religious grounds, you wouldn't fall foul of law. Think when you have this law saying it only applies to people putting on the masks in rallies, protests, it only applies when there is a high level of risk. It's a positive thing for Hong Kong. It would work for Hong Kong. I see many people of my age. They see things differently. They are on the other side. I don't want to be doxxed. I don't want to be subject to vigilante violence. I check what's on LIHKG as well. But then many of those that you see as so-called valiant, those people, I just don't see their tactics as the solution to the problem. For all those of you here, if you believe your ideals should be translated into reality, there are other peaceful alternatives. In Hong Kong, we're in an inclusive society. We can accommodate different views, different opinions, even different languages. At this point, I hold life dearly. I'm against violence. I hope Hong Kong can get back on track, get back on its feet. And I believe both sides are to blame. Those enforcing the law, members of the public. I hope we could take a step back and restore Hong Kong to the peace that we knew for so long. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chen Yu Lam. Good morning. Let me start by telling you who I am. I'm just an ordinary citizen. I go to work day in, day out. I go home, look after my son. Over these years, I voted every time, and every time I saw the Pan Democrats not getting the majority, every time then they point their fingers. But over the past few months, why were so many people taking to the street, so many people in these protests? The government didn't listen. There are people saying they couldn't understand why so many young people were in the street protesting. I think over the past 2 years, I have to credit Caroline. Well, I'm being sarcastic, really. Every time you see this integration of Hong Kong into the mainland. You see people going to mainland when they want to get a drink, when they go to do shopping. If were it not for this extradition bill, people wouldn't be wouldn't realize what's going on there. At first, only a small number of people were against. I see lawmakers here trying to make people here realize what we're dealing with here. On 9th of June, the protest, what we got was that the government was going to go ahead with the extradition bill. And then we had more people taking to the street. After the protest, there might have been some violence. But the Hong Kong police use crazy ways to harm. They beat people up. They arrested members of the public. And afterwards, we also had alleged rape, sexual assault, and the suspect alleged killing. And then we heard that in the name of ending this violence, we got this prohibition on face covering regulation. Hong Kong is a crowded place. How can you prevent people from putting on a mask? You're only going to help germs spread. I have 2 children. When the Education Bureau announced the prohibition on face covering regulation, many parents were concerned. They worry that even if their children are sick, they go to the exams, tests, they dare not put on a face mask. They dare not ask their children to put on a face mask. You have all these contagious diseases in schools. One of my children has been sick for 2 months. You say that this kind of mask ban has been in place in many democracies, but then they have a system to channel the discontent from the people. Look here, back in Hong Kong, we don't have that. I feel that I'm saying something, but it's all futile. And we see so-called government officials sitting there, they're pretending they're working on something, they're pretending they're listening, but they're not. Thank you. Next, Ms. Chang Lai Shan. Good morning, everyone. I'm also an ordinary citizen, but I'm in favor of the government's decision to bring in the prohibition of face covering regulation. I think in recent months we are at a point of emergency. The chief executive should have done this earlier, instead of just letting radical protesters putting on their masks and commit all this violence, the vandalism. The violence has come to the point and escalated, and has still been escalating. My friends are saying that there seems to be no way to end the violence. If the protesters are there for the good of Hong Kong, and if they have something if their input can make Hong Kong a better place, we would support them. Even if the government doesn't listen to them. And I think for a long time, for those who style themselves as peaceful, rational, and non-violent, they should watch out and watch out so that they don't become pawns of those. You see people hurling petrol bombs and committing all other kinds of violent acts. In other countries overseas, these would be acts of terrorism. what the tactics used by protesters here will not secure more greater liberties, freedoms for people of Hong Kong. It would do the contrary, would do the opposite. Because our government can't even function properly now. As for the daily lives of ordinary citizens, whether they're going to school, whether they're going to work, they have been affected. At first, the protesters targeted the government. Now they are also targeting private enterprises, shops, or those banks with connection with China. I was trying to get cash from the ATM machine, but then there was not a single one of them available. It was inconvenient. And for those who have different political opinions, they were subject to vigilante violence. Aren't you guys supposed to be rational, peaceful, non-violent? You're saying that you're doing this for the good of Hong Kong, and why aren't you letting those who see things differently? Why aren't you letting them speak? The 5 demands. If you see them as something good, if you believe you are right with the 5 demands, you should be convincing everyone in Hong Kong that you're doing the right thing. But then what you're doing here is that, while the logic is like, if we burn, you burn with us. That's what you're doing. That's why I support this prohibition on face covering regulation. We want to keep out those people who are there with ulterior motives. I think without the mask, you guys are actually entitled. You have access to better protection. Next, Mr. Ao King Ken. Thank you, Chairman. The chief executive, the Hong Kong government rather, and along with the police, have taken pleasure in massacring Hong Kong people. And back in October, they bulldozed through the prohibition and face covering regulation. The crimes and sins committed by the government is too many to name, and I'm strongly against them. For a long time, the police force has lost control. They have been doing everything with impunity. They have been killing people. They're doing all kinds of atrocities. The prohibition on face covering regulation simply encouraged the police to usurp the functions of the courts. The police has been taking the law into their own hands. They have been trying to kill reporters, medical staff, and citizens. The death of Zhao Zilok is a sign of the escalating police brutality. Moreover, those people have been arrested for putting on a mask. You see them; they're getting harsh sentences. You see civil rights being undermined. You also see people in Hong Kong are determined to fight back against police brutality, and there's no end in sight for the violence. The government has bypassed the legislative process, and by doing that, the government simply usurped the functions of the Legislative Council. That's the same as the Nazis in Germany back in the old days when they usurped the functions of Reichstag. And that's why we should do away with the prohibition on face covering regulation. And this mask ban is also undermining the rule of law in its implementation. What are we talking about, the rule of law? There should always be a fair trial, and you shouldn't be shooting people on the spot. But we could see with our eyes officers who have lost control. They're using metal bars, hitting people in the head heavily. There are also pepper balls, rubber bullets, and even toxic gas. That's what they use on people. The mask ban has become something. It has been used for those who massacred people, and that's why we should do away with the law. Chairman, the UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who fought the Nazis, tried to encourage those in their countries. They're saying that we should defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the field.
We shall never surrender. 香港人永不投降。另外
Hong Kong people will never give in, and Ao King Ken, I will never take my own life. If I die, this will be a murder. Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our time. We should hold the police to account, reform and reorganize the police. Thank you.
Next, Ms. Chiu Kwan. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members, and friends from the community. I'm a new immigrant. Now, my Cantonese may not be perfect, but I would like to give our views in Cantonese, so I ask for your indulgence. I support the prohibition on face covering regulation. I hope Hong Kong will have its order restored as soon as possible. I have 3 points to make. First of all, now the prohibition on face covering regulation helps plug a loophole in the law. Now, Hong Kong people enjoy basic rights of assembly and marches. If we protest in a peaceful and rational and non-violent means, there is no need to cover our face. But then in the past few months, we see that on the TV, through various channels, we see that MTR stations, Maxim's outlets, Starbucks, 360, and many Chinese banks have been set on fire and vandalized. Petrol bombs were hurled. And then for people with different political views, they were beaten up. So it's a handful of protesters who conceal their identity by covering their face, so it makes it difficult for the police to enforce the law. If this is loophole in the law, then there has to be a law to plug the loophole and stop such lawful behavior. Second point, mask ban is not unique to Hong Kong. In the States, Canada, Germany, and other countries, they also have similar legislation. So a mask ban will prevent radical protesters from evading justice by covering their face. So Hong Kong should also make reference to the examples in other countries. We should have suitable legislation. There has to be a clear guideline for the police force to stop these illegal activities. Thirdly, this regulation would prevent some young people from taking part in the unlawful protests. We've seen that many young people arrested were secondary and university students. The youngest arrestee was aged only 12. So here we're talking about young students who are not yet mature, and they believe that by covering their face, and they could take part in unlawful activities and still escape the law. So escape justice. So that's why this regulation will help to prevent young students from taking part in protests or being urged to take part in protests. So I believe the regulation will be very important in maintaining law and order in Hong Kong. Finally, I hope the Hong Kong SAR government should listen to the views of young people through various channels. Your time is up. Next, Ms. Yu Feng Han. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Now, we do not have an emergency, but the Lam government invoked the emergency regulation ordinance to enact this prohibition on face covering regulation. That's a serious deprivation of our basic right, and I strongly condemn that. I'm indignant about it, and I hope this council will repeal this regulation. We see that since the regulation came into force, there were actually far more people wearing masks in protests. So we can see that this regulation won't help to curb violence, but rather it will lead to more confrontation. And then Hong Kong people will just resist harder. So you can see that this regulation is impossible to enforce. And for many people who just want to express their views in a peaceful manner, are now put under risk of breaking the law. So this is not going to help the conflicts that's taken place in Hong Kong since June. It will only lead to more public anger, and then will push Hong Kong down an abyss. The regulation is an evil law, and it's difficult to enforce. In many police public confrontations, we know that there is no equality in the force used by the police and the protesters. Now the police try to hide their identity number, so the public cannot monitor the performance of the police, and also the public will not know enough about the relevant rules and laws, so it's difficult for us to complain against the police. And then we see that very often the police just venting their anger, and then they would just pull down people's face masks. Now, the public should enjoy basic civil rights and freedoms under the basic law, but now the police use wearing masks to hide their identity when they're carrying out their duties. So they no longer look like police officers who protect the public, but rather they look more like bandits. This will affect investors' confidence. Now, we've worked very hard to make Hong Kong a financial center. And then when the police carry out their duties, they have no regard to exemption granted on the grounds of religion or medical reasons. They just pull off people's masks as they wish. And so many people are scared to wear a mask, and that could lead to hygiene and other medical problems. Especially when there's a flu pandemic, it might lead to even more medical problems. And then Hong Kong will suffer even further. Now, I must stress that this approach adopted by the SAR government is actually an abuse of power and is against Article 73 of the Basic Law, which gives powers to this council to enact laws. And so the government is expanding its powers and is no longer under check, and then that will push Hong Kong to destruction. Next, I'm against the prohibition of face covering regulation. Now, the government did so because it thought that there's escalating violence among the public. But what about the violence of the police? That's also serious. And now we see that the police are still wearing masks as they enforce the law. As at the 31st of October, the police has arrested about 3,000 people. At the end, only 70% have been charged. So we see that there is excessive arrests. But then when the public wants to complain, now do police officers have warrant card? They could say, no, we don't have it, or they refuse to show you. And then even if they show you a warrant card, you don't know if that's real or not. And then they wear a mask, so it's simply impossible to take any police officers to task. Mr. Cheung Ning, Mr. Cheung Ping, Ms. Ao Kun, they said that protesters try to destroy private businesses and so on. But then this action targeted those businesses that support the police. If you want to get to the source of problems because of police violence, it keeps escalating. That's why public anger also keeps escalating. Now, people are so angry because of the escalating police brutality. So you want to deal with evil issue, and then you come out with an evil or do that. It's a vicious circle. It could never resolve anything. So that's why I think we need to set up an independent inquiry to take the police to task, and that's a way to vent public anger. Now, I'm sure, of the pro-establishment camp doesn't want to see more violence, right? So please take seriously this demand for an independent inquiry. Now, the government enacted this regulation because they're afraid the government would do this and the people would do this and that. But really, the people come first, and those who are in power just to serve the people. So please understand that. Now, and also, I'm an optimistic person. I definitely will not take my own life. Next, Mr. Mwai Chiu. I think it's a repetition of, or it's one mistake after another to enact the prohibition on face covering regulation. In June, so many people took to the street, but Carrie Lam insisted on taking forward the China extradition bill, and so it should cause more public anger. And now you are making another mistake. You're trying to enact this prohibition on face covering regulation to stop violence and disorder. But that again, this is a mistake. Now there are people who are afraid that they will suffer at the workplace if they're seen to be taking part in protests. But now you are using this autocratic means by invoking the emergency regulations ordinance, and then you enacted the prohibition on face covering regulation, so you could further abuse your power. And then the council has been sidelined. So that means the executive will further disregard public opinion. It will be even more arrogant. And then the police is not subject to any check. They act in a barbaric manner. And the problem will only get worse. Some just said this regulation offers exemption for on the grounds of religion or illness. So some people could wear a mask regardless of this regulation. But you can see when the police enforce law, they don't care. They don't care if you are ill or is it for religious reason. The first thing they do when they approach you is to take away your mask or your gas mask. The police are brutal in the way they enforce law. That's what I want to point out. We shouldn't just consider about the rights of peaceful protesters. We have to consider what is the source of violence. It's because in the past the government and pro-establishment camps have been radical. You do whatever you did whatever you wanted. You used all means to disqualify members and candidates, and you rushed through legislation. You just rush to support the government. You wouldn't listen to views and reasons, and that's why now young people have all waken up. So in the past, the Qing dynasty did not listen to people, and so it's not just about losing a dynasty. The whole country was, suffered. So we have to learn from history. We must not go against the will of the people. Otherwise, we will be punished by history. Ms. Lo Si Kwong, historians said that, so be careful. So don't cause a mess in China and Hong Kong. Thank you. I want to speak, please. Okay, you want to speak, Ms. Su Wing Yen? Okay. I'm strongly against the prohibition on face covering regulation. Now we see that the mainstream of protesters are peaceful. I see there are some violent protests, but I can see that it's because they want the government to respond to the 5 demands. That's the means they adopted. That's why I believe a mask ban won't resolve the matter. Rather, it's for the government to actively respond to the 5 demands put forward by the people. Now, since the coming to force of the regulation, the police have been enforcing the law in rather different ways, and then we see there's even more brutality. It's only causing more unrest in society. My apology. Our healthcare system is already under strain, and we don't want to see so much turbulence in society. Don't forget that the police keep firing tear gas. And then we tell people you must not wear a mask. And if you want to wear a mask, you have to prove that you are sick. You need a medical certificate. It's unreasonable. That's all. Thank you.
出席今
So those attending the meeting today, we have the Undersecretary from the Security Bureau, and also we also have the Administrative Assistant Secretary for Security, Mr. Lau Wai-ming. We also have someone from the Senior Assistant Solicitor General, Mr. Vernon Low, and also from Security Bureau, Assistant Secretary for Security, Ms. Anna Leung. Well, this morning, for session 1 of our hearing, the individuals are done with their speech. I'm just wondering if the government has any response at this point. Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for your views. As you were giving us your views, we have been listening. We hope that you can see that the government in bring in the prohibition of face covering regulation. The government has put a lot of thought into this and has paid attention to what's going on in our society. In from early June to early October, over this 4-month period, so much we didn't really get to explain to everyone what this mask ban was all about until early October. But if you look back to the 4-month period, June to October, we have more than 400 incidents of protest rallies. Many of these public order events ended in violence. All these incidents have led to injuries of more than 1,100 people. From 29th of September to 2nd of October, the violence escalated. In many districts in Hong Kong, we have seen riots of different sizes. Over those few days, the police fired 6 live rounds to protect their own safety. We see radical protesters used all kinds of dangerous weapons. They were damaging property and hurting people. They beat up those who had different opinions. And they routinely used petrol bombs, they set fires, they blocked roads, assaulted police officers, police vans, and police stations. Up to today, we have around 370 police officers who were injured, and there are many others seriously injured. We see this massive vandalism of stations, shops. This was mentioned by someone speaking just then. In the light of all this happening, that's why we're doing this. And then you also see the police seized a lot of materials for making bombs. There was the homemade bomb detonate in a crowded area. We can't let that kind of thing go on. We can't just let people's life, property get threatened. We should have some form of peace. We should have to preserve safety of our people. We see protesters in full protective gear. They have offensive weapons with them, some of them lethal weapons. They put on a mask to conceal their identity, to evade police investigation. Some of them had the gall to break the law. When we were thinking about this law, there was serious threat to public safety, and that's why the chief executive in council invoked the emergency regulations ordinance and made this prohibition of face covering regulation to ban the use of face covering in certain circumstances. Just then, a member of the public said that they dared not put on a face mask. Here's something I want to point out. If it's in your daily life, say if you're on the street, you can still put on a mask. you cannot put on the mask only in certain circumstances. In circumstances that may end up in riots, that's when you can't put on a mask. It's also stated in the regulation. The point of this regulation is to deter the violent kind from engaging in violent illegal activities. And the second aim of this regulation is to help police investigators gather evidence and help them with their investigation. Many of those who have broken the law had the mask put on, and the police were unable to identify who they were. That also made gathering evidence difficult. So we're hoping this law could also help the police with their investigation. So that's the 2 points, the two aims of the regulations. Here, something we're thinking is that we're hoping that with this regulation, we want to stop these protesters from thinking that they can get away with it by putting on a mask. No matter who you are, if you've broken the law, there are legal consequences. We don't want to give these protesters a false impression that they can break the law with impunity. One of the purposes of having this law in place is that there will always be legal consequences for lawbreakers. We hope to have this deterrent effect, and by having that, we hope to end the violence and stop the disruption, and stop all the damage to property. And we don't want more people getting hurt. And we hope to restore order, stability to Hong Kong, and return things to normalcy, the old ways that we knew. Another consideration. In our society, we see the violence escalating, things getting smashed up. We see young people taking part. You can tell that these young people, they are ruining their own future. Another reason we're having this regulation is that we want these people to realize there are consequences. Even with a mask on, there will be legal liability. They should respect the law, especially for young people. If you break the law, you're ruining your bright future. Chairman, next maybe I should briefly respond to some of the things brought up by the members of the public who just spoke. Ms. Liu Lock was saying that, and a few others, they brought up this point about the police. Why are we letting police put on a mask but not the protesters? There's a reason for this. The police had to put on a mask because they use tear gas. There's tears. They have to. Because they have to keep enforcing the law. They have to be on the scene to preserve the peace and stability of society. We have more than 370 officers who were injured, some of them seriously. One of them got slashed in the neck. 2 of them were attacked with corrosive liquid. They're doing some very painful transplant operations. Every time when they went through this kind of skin grafting, you see all this threat to police officers. You see petrol bombs, also metal balls fired at them. Police officers on duty deserve protection. That's how they can keep doing their job. The exceptions we see in Section 4, subsection 3, we have this defense saying that if someone's doing the job and they have to put on a mask to do their job, that will be a defense. And there's also the reasonable excuse. I talked about this in this chamber before. Reporters will have to cover the developments, and they have to be on the scene. they're doing their job, and to ensure their safety, they have to put on face covering. Could be something to protect them from the tear gas, and that's reasonable. In Section 4, Subsection 3, if you're engaged in a professional or employment, or it could also be about religion, or if someone has pre-existing medical health reason, they can put on a mask. A lady just then, I think was saying, or maybe she has left. She was saying she dared not put on a mask even when she's sick. Well, let's put it this way: if she has a pre-existing medical reason, it's okay for her to put on a mask. Just then, another member of the public also said something about the police. They're saying the police are abusing their power. I want to point out that the police do have a menu to go by. They have guidelines to go by in 3 ways. If they have to use force, they have to use force to. They have to use the minimum level of force to achieve a certain end. Before they use their force, they also have to issue warnings as much as possible and give time to the other side to cease what they're doing. Once the end is achieved, the force will no longer be used. Mr. Alkin just said that there's some on-the-spot execution. I have to point out that I disagree with his claims. Second, I also have to draw attention to the fact that rioters, when they dealing with those with different political opinions, when they see people taking off phone and taking pictures, you see people doing that kind of thing get beaten up. They were subject to mob violence. These protesters were usurping the functions of law enforcement officers and judges, and they were even the lawmakers on the spot, because they were just enforcing their own rules on those they think have broken the laws. They are effectively, quote-unquote, sentencing these people to hospitals. This is all beyond the pale. We have to ensure the safety of people, and we want to make sure the safety is protected. Ms. Chen Lai-shen mentioned something about that the regulation encroaches on some of her freedoms. We have done something, and we even have it in the regulation to protect those citizens. They can go about their daily lives. The safeguards are incorporated. We hope lawmakers here, they can appreciate our effort. We hope restore society to calm and stability. Let's return to good old ways. Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank everyone for attending the hearing. Now we're at the end of session 1. We don't have time. We have to start session 2 at 10:30. We're overrunning. I want to thank everyone again. We'll be ready for the next session. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, he was trying to say something. Couldn't hear him. Do we have any time to? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. The Undersecretary was saying something. We want to have a dialogue with him, have an exchange with him. Is there a time for us to do that? Time permitting, I can arrange that. Now, we can always have a dialogue with the Undersecretary. But the point today is to let those deputations, the individuals, so we have to let them engage with the Undersecretary. But I hope the Undersecretary could keep his responses brief. I can only suggest that to him. I have no control over that. Mr. Chang, could you hand him the microphone? Dr. Chang Chung-tai. Is there a Q&A session for members? if it's possible, I could try to do that. If not, I would just leave. I hope you can be here because I mean this is wasting time. Please don't put it that way. You don't say that this hearing is a waste of your time. Next, we have those for session 2. And the secretary, do you need a break? Or we'll just have you come in after the people for the second session come in.
Welcome to the public hearing on the prohibition on face covering regulation. This is session 2. So we had a really tight schedule for the first session, so many members and government officials needed a short bathroom break. So I'm sorry I have to keep you for maybe a minute or two before we can start.
Repeat. 等埋局方阿劉生同阿梁女士翻嚟先。OK。